we're paying our drivers to build their brands and their profiles. We essentially took between $15 to $20 million off the top of the media rights deal. And we said, for these drivers in the Cup Series, the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, and the Truck Series, if you become more relevant, if you grow your social following, if you show up on Good Morning America, if you do a TV show with Netflix or Amazon Prime, or we show up more often with Fox, then we will give you a check. And it's real money. The winner of this, it's called the Driver Ambassador Program. So the winner of this Driver Ambassador Program is Joey Logano. Last year, he got a check for $1 million.
Welcome to Future of Fandom, the podcast where leagues, teams, and federations learn how to turn passive viewers into loyal superfans through gamification, loyalty, and next-gen engagement. Let's build what's next together.
Welcome to the Future of Fandom. I'm Mihir Valavalkar. I'm the CEO and co-founder. And today we have a very special guest. We have Brian Herbst from NASCAR. He is the EVP and the Chief Media and Revenue Officer. Thank you and welcome.
Hey, thanks for taking the time. This is very cool. Appreciate the invite.
I love the background. I love the studio. Maybe we start with something like that because it's really shiny and fancy.
We come for first impressions, I guess. Yeah, like for those of you guys who are not following on video, you can probably tell pretty quickly who the startup person is and who the corporate person is on this interview. I am doing it from our very fancy content production hub here in Concord, North Carolina. We built a now $60 million and counting production building in Concord to better service our fan base and our industry, and I guess do podcasts with me here as well, which is really special. But great to be with you today.
I should have taken you up on the offer to come down there and do this in person. Lesson learned. It really is impressive. Brian, obviously your role has shifted quite a bit. We've known each other for a few years now. I don't think I would do justice by reading out from bio. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about what you're doing now, your role at NASCAR, how it has evolved?
Well, sure. Yeah. So I've been here for 21 years, and I started out as an intern. So it's evolved quite a lot over those 21 years, for sure. The work that I'm focused on now, media rights, production business, specifically the live event production business, technology as well. The sales piece, I get to work with that team as well. And there's a few ancillary businesses that probably are not well known outside of NASCAR circles, but there's a headset company. So if you think about like a crew chief talking to a driver or a spotter talking to a driver, we own that company. It's a hardware company called Racing Electronics. I get to work with the folks at Racing Electronics, and we own a radio company called Motor Racing Network that I work with as well. So most of the revenue functions and then the media piece I get to work with every day.
That's fantastic. I definitely want to dig in deeper with you. But just to get started, I actually have to start with a personal anecdote. I went for my first NASCAR race this year. Actually, I went to the Daytona 500. Exceeded all expectations. I mean, expectations were varied, from everything from the crowd, the excitement, the noise. I went there, as a guest of Fox, so I got the full VIP treatment. Everything from the pit lane to the suite to the crowd. It was unbelievable, actually. The technology, even the pit crew. Obviously, I grew up as a Formula One fan. Grew up in India. Wasn't really exposed to NASCAR as much until I came to the US for studies. But this was my first real life experience, and obviously, there's a varied fan base. I think a lot of fans are, you have a very passionate and loyal fan base. I think that part was very clear from being there. Everyone knew what was happening. It was a 200 lap race, and people were glued onto the action the whole time. But you've also grown your audience to a certain extent. You've made a very concerted effort. Obviously, Formula One coming into the US brought a different flavor for motorsports as well. I'm curious, as you cater to your fan bases, how much do you have to worry about different types of audiences, fragmented media ecosystem, media rights, and obviously that falls very squarely within your territory. How do you cater to different fan bases, new fans versus loyal and passionate fans?
I think if you operate at the scale that we do, and we're $1 billion plus a year media rights property, one of the top 5 or 6 in the country. When you make a decision on media rights or distribution, it's not done in a vacuum. So you're doing it with the folks that run the competition side of the house, who we work closely with on every single decision. Work closely with the marketing folks. You try to dig into the data as much as you possibly can, but ultimately, you're trying to make a decision that is authentic to your property and works for your fan base, but also it's relevant in the time that you're making that decision. So, for instance, if we are doing a media rights deal in 2013, our strategy on that deal is going to be a lot different than doing a media rights deal in 2023 when we last did our deal. And it would probably look different in 2026 if we're in the market today. But just to use your example, what was kind of interesting and kind of fun, and you can get creative if you work at a company like NASCAR, which is a family-owned company, it's a private family-owned company, is the agency to make big changes at scale, like changing our playoff format, which we did and we announced in this studio, like bringing a streamer into the equation, like an Amazon and Warner Brothers Discovery with their HBO Max product. We can operate at a scale and with a nimbleness that I think is not seen often in the other leagues and the other properties. There is no committee. It is us, our industry, and the board, and it allows us to operate not just at scale, but at a pace that I think is surprising to folks in the industry for sure. Mhm.
Now, and having said that, when you have multiple different media partners, which is not traditionally how it was for the longest time, it was Fox and NBC. Now you have Amazon, you have HBO Max. How do you maintain the consistency of the experience from a viewer standpoint, or are you actually letting each of your partners do their own thing in a way?
Oh, yeah, no, great question. So I'd say there's probably two questions to address there. One is one we hear a lot is fragmentation in sports and why is that happening? So I'm happy to hit that, and then I'll talk about kind of the NASCAR challenge specifically. So I think what you're seeing in terms of fragmentation of sports rights, whether you are the NFL or you are NASCAR or you're Major League Baseball, is a lot of the leagues, a lot of the properties, and we're certainly among them, our media rights and our distribution strategies will essentially follow where content consumption patterns are going. So if I go back to 2013, you're either watching content on broadcast TV or you're watching content on a cable platform because Netflix was not in the business. YouTube was cat videos and dogs on skateboards. They're not buying NFL Sunday Ticket. Fast forward to 2023, and you have, when we're doing our deal, you have digital streaming consumption probably at somewhere between 35, 36% of total consumption. And now that's probably at 42, 43%. So we saw digital streaming consumption numbers go up, but our fan base has traditionally been on linear TV. So what we tried to do in our rights agreement was balance the need to have some sort of digital streaming offering to future proof our sport and to get younger. And we did get younger last year in the first year of our media rights agreement. We grew 16% in the 18 to 34 demo year over year. So we saw Amazon in particular they were 6 or 7 years younger than a traditional linear broadcast, but that same cohort followed to the rest of the season. So it's not like there was a spike only on Amazon and it did not follow during the TNT and USA portion of the calendar, NBC portion of the calendar. It stayed the entire year. So that was helpful. And the second piece that I would just address is more NASCAR specific is if we're in the middle of NBA season right now, and if you're an NBA fan, there's going to be some games on Prime. There's going to be some games on NBC. There's going to be some games on ESPN. And day by day, you kind of have to check the internet and figure out where that's going to be. It's a little bit easier for us. I think we have a little bit of a competitive advantage here because we essentially just have to set up that upcoming week. So on Sunday, we'll be on Big Fox for our Cup Series race. The next Sunday will be on either Fox or FS1. And so you have a whole week to kind of educate your fan base in terms of where you're going. And we have to do handoffs 3 different times, at least with respect to the NASCAR Cup Series. So we have to promote like crazy from Fox to Amazon. We have to promote like crazy from Amazon to TNT. We have to promote like crazy from TNT to NBC and USA. And we build in cross-promotional obligations into all of those deals, as well as carve out institutional inventory in our broadcast to make sure that that education is out there. But I think we have a little bit of a leg up because it's a weekend-based sport, and you just have to make sure that you know going into that weekend where NASCAR is.
What platforms are you primarily using to drive that education for your fan base? I mean, is it still mostly on broadcast or linear, or your digital and social media properties coming into play in terms of educating fans or getting them ready for the next weekend?
It's all of the above. So it's linear where we have institutional time carved out, and we could also flex some of that institutional time outside of NASCAR broadcasts. So if we wanted to be during on the World Baseball Classic on Fox, we didn't want a NASCAR tune-in spot, for instance, to run during a NASCAR race because we kind of already have that fan. But we wanted to speak outside of the NASCAR universe. We can flex that institutional time to different platforms from our properties. There's a pretty significant third-party digital and social spend that we have for both tune-in and for ticketing efforts. But the lever that has gotten a lot more investment over the course of the last 3 or 4 years in particular is on the content machine in particular. And that's part of the reason for this building, the investment that we made here. But what we're seeing is original content that creates buzzy social videos, frankly, and cuts through the mainstream. We need to think about that differently in terms of driving relevance for our sport, whether it's a well produced social video that promotes our San Diego race that we have on the Navy base coming up later this year, or it's a show on Amazon, or it's a show on Netflix. That's where a larger percentage of our marketing dollars are going, at least versus, let's say, 2021, 2022.
Interesting. And have you had any feedback from your from your customer base or from your user audience in a way, like in terms of the how they are adapting to this new shifting media rights landscape?
Sure. So I would say like the viewership numbers that we had last year in the first year of the deal, they hit exactly the projections that we expected. So the cable races did what we expected the cable races to do. The Amazon races did frankly better in year one than we expected them to do. If it's on Big Fox or Big NBC, those numbers came in where we expected. So we've seen the fan come along with us on this kind of journey, which has been super helpful. And then in terms of more like short term tactical type of stuff, like I'll give you one example. We had this really buzzy video for we're running a race on the actual Navy base, like the Top Gun Navy base that you've seen in Top Gun 1 and Top Gun 2. Yeah, we're shutting down Coronado, the island in San Diego for the naval base for the weekend, and NASCAR will run on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with all three series. But we did a social video just around that to promote it. So there wasn't much of a stiff press conference in the studio that you see me in today. There's not a lot of guys in suits that are talking to you about talking points and platitudes. It was led by this social video, became the hottest selling ticket that we had in the NASCAR circuit within 24 to 48 hours of that social video. So we see real time examples like that that are starting to pay off as well.
I mean, I will say, and this is again going back to my experience in Daytona, it is really cool how much NASCAR sort of leans into the culture aspect of it and owning that cultural aspect of what you do. There's real Americana all in full view.
I think what surprises people of if when you go to a NASCAR event is the scale of it all. So the track that you went to, Mahir, is Daytona International Speedway. It's obviously our flagship track and tentpole event, signature event to start the season. There was when we renovated that track. We spent $400 million on steel, essentially alone to build that track. It's a $2.5 million or 2.5 mile track. So it's a very big piece of real estate. NASCAR was the largest buyer of U.S. steel during that year when we were building Daytona National Speedway.
That's a cool factoid actually.
It's a crazy fact. And then when you go there, you can kind of see why, like just the scale and the volume of it all. So, and then the lifestyle piece that you touched on a little bit, there was 105,000 people that joined us just in the grandstands during that Daytona 500 week. And there was another 30 to 40,000 that are in the campgrounds in the infield that are essentially living there for 4 or 5 days with their best buddies and their family and friends. And that's their vacation. And I don't think there's another sport on the planet that has that type of community or lifestyle based in their sport.
I was amazed by how vertical the the stadium or the stands were. Like it almost felt vertical, straight vertical. It was so steep. The it was awesome. You touched on a few different things actually there, and just leading into my next question, more about you talked about you leaning on your originals a lot to drive tune-ins and education, but then there's also increased focus on personalities and drivers and documentaries. That's whether it's on Amazon, Netflix, etc. How much of that has become a key part of your programming mix and long-term fan development strategy?
It's critical. So I'd say for two areas. I think if you think about some of the other media companies and platforms, they're continuing to invest more and more in live sports, in particular in live programming, and you see those rights fees going up, at least on the tier one properties. like ourselves, they're going up, cycle over cycle and year over year. There are sometimes where the studio-based programming, there's a little bit less attention to that, and there's more attention to the games themselves, and so for a property like us, it becomes incumbent on us to do that work. So if Fox used to do a studio show, and it becomes incumbent on us to program YouTube a little bit better, to program a fast channel platform a little bit better, leverage our archives to make sure that we're bringing in the right talent to tell the story of our sport, because we want to be in the conversation not just on Saturday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We want to be in the conversation Monday through Thursday, as well. And so, again, building a $60 million production facility, taking over the live event productions for our Saturday series, the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts series, like that's a scale that we haven't operated in the past, but we needed to in this evolving times in the media landscape.
Once you've captured the fans' attention, let's say through a documentary or a social or some creator-led series, where does the journey go from there? What does the journey for the fan look like? How do you keep them engaged, repeat engagement, so to speak?
It's different for each fan base or each fan, I would say. Like the fact that we are as vertical an organization as we are, so we control most of the NASCAR tracks, we control the media rights, we control the archiving, we obviously have this building, we control our marketing efforts, we control a database that has tens of millions of fans inside of it. Because as long as you've bought a ticket to a NASCAR event or you've played a fantasy game on NASCAR.com, then we have that first party data. So there's certain fans, like certainly myself, where they our marketing and customer acquisition team knows everything about me, right? And then there's certain fans that have checked out that San Diego video on X or on Instagram, and we don't have access to that person directly. We can follow via lookalike marketing and things like that, and we do that. But it depends on where you are and kind of your fan journey. Like there's for myself personally, I'm a father of 3 girls. They're 10, 8, and 6. I don't have a lot of time to watch all the sports that I watched when I was 24, 25 years old. So I pick 1 or 2 that I can actually watch a 3-hour event. It's basically at this point in my life, like NASCAR and the Buffalo Bills, that's it. And then I'll pay attention to March Madness during March Madness time. I'll pay attention to the NBA during the playoffs. I'll pay attention to the NHL if my Sabres are in the playoffs, which is not very often. But I think it's that's an individual kind of journey that each person's on. All we can do is have the right tools and levers that can execute against that as someone becomes more interested in NASCAR.
I'm actually curious. What's your NBA fandom? What's your NBA team?
A little bit of a mutt, like just like anybody else. I'm a kid of the '80s, and so I idolize Michael Jordan, which is a little surreal to have him in the sport and at team owner council meetings right now. But as I moved to Charlotte, which I moved to Charlotte in 2005, we became season ticket holders for the at the time Charlotte Bobcats, often forgotten about name. So we're Hornets fans here.
The subject that's most near and dear to my heart is obviously loyalty, membership, community building, fan engagement. Really the whole podcast is about the future of fandom and how do you keep fans engaged, loyal, how do you reward your best fans? How do you think about that? Obviously, I think NASCAR has done a lot in this space. Even just coming, piggybacking off of what you said before, it depends on each fan and how do you bring them back into your ecosystem. How does NASCAR think about it?
So I'll give you some numbers first, and then I'll like back into your question if that makes sense. If you think about somebody, the Daytona 500 in a non-rain impacted year, we're probably going to do 8 million viewers for the Daytona 500. So that's kind of like your most casual audience that we're going to have all year. There's going to be people that tune in for that race that are not going to tune in the next week, and they might not tune in for a few weeks. That's a casual event. Not this. It's like our version of the Super Bowl where you're gonna have people that watch the Super Bowl that don't watch the NFC Championship game, for instance. So to me, like that 8 million number is like that's what you want to monetize, and then everything else kind of trades down from there. So in terms of average viewership for the Cup Series, that's about 2.5 million. Our Saturday series is it's called the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. That does about 1 to 1.1 million viewers per event. Just to like compare that, we often take that Saturday series, the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, for granted. That 1.1 million is about what F1 did last year on their broadcast as well. That's about 2 times higher than a typical MLB regular season game. So we don't think about it as often as we probably should. But that punches above its weight in terms of what you would think it would do in a typical week. Then the truck series is on Friday. Typically, that usually will do 500 to 600,000 viewers. Again, that's probably a little higher than an EPL game or an NHL game. So we have these like stable of properties that we essentially program during the weekend. And I would say the journey on your fandom kind of goes up and down depending on your interest level. And our goal is to try to get you involved in all of those series and all of those pieces of content. But there's also pieces of content where we'll put an original content series together for Netflix. It'll do really, really well. It'll trend to the top 5 on the entire Netflix platform for a week. And 90% of the people that watched that Netflix follow doc show for us did not watch any bit of the NASCAR playoffs, for instance. So I think us trying to pull every lever that we possibly can, whether it's on the social side, the original content side, we need to work harder in this day and age in order to set ourselves up well to grow our sport, and then also set ourselves up well for sponsorship, media rights discussions to monetize the property as well.
From a marketing standpoint, I know you guys have fan rewards. I know there's ticketing and trackside operations is a big part of. I don't know what's the best how to best phrase this question, but like, really casting a wide net because there's audience on TV, there's audience in person, there's audience on social. There are times when you can unify that fan profile. I think this is a task that every organization is taking more seriously these days. But as you said it before, there are people who follow you on the original social series that you don't know enough about. What comes next in terms of like growing that fan base, consolidating that fan base more than anything else, actually?
I think one thing that probably doesn't get as much attention as I'd like it to, maybe personally, is part of what we did in the media rights deal in this last cycle, not just the media rights deal, but our discussions with the industry that followed the execution of media rights deals is NASCAR is paying our drivers for the first time ever as well. And we're paying our drivers to build their brands and their profiles. So we essentially took between 15 to $20 million off the top of the media rights deal. And we said, for these drivers in the Cup Series, the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, and the Truck Series, if you become more relevant, if you grow your social following, if you show up on Good Morning America, if you do a TV show with Netflix or Amazon Prime, or we show up more often with Fox, then we will give you a check, and it's real money. The winner of this, it's called the Driver Incentive Program, or Driver Ambassador Program, sorry. The winner of this Driver Ambassador Program is Joey Logano. Last year, he got a check for $1 million. So it's real money. And I think when you talk about dollars of that scale, and the denominator in terms of number of drivers is so low. We have 36 drivers in the Cup Series, 30 drivers in the Xfinity or the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series now. Like it becomes real money that the drivers have been chasing to frankly grow their profiles outside of just NASCAR circles and beyond that. So last year was the first year of that program, but there's only so much that NASCAR's corporate machine can do, but leading on the stars of our sport, we want to set themselves up better to grow their platforms in our sport as well.
And actually, that was going to be my question. Is NASCAR sort of setting up or teeing up all of these media opportunities like Good Morning America for the drivers and having the drivers come? Or you're sort of telling the drivers, like, you and your agents figure out how to go do this. And if you do it well, we reward you for it.
Yeah, it actually comes from all angles. So we, NASCAR, will get those opportunities. So if we want somebody to do a hit on the Pat McAfee show, we may be pushing for those opportunities. We also have a third-party agency, CAA, that's soliciting some of those on our behalf just because uh, they're more connected than probably we are in Charlotte, North Carolina
And
sometimes.
anyone is, I would say.
Yeah, you got it. And then there are times where there's an opportunity that comes directly from the driver or the team, where they will submit it to us, and 9 times out of 10 say, "Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. That'll grow the sport." And the driver then gets points for their participation in that event. And the more points you get, the higher you go up the leaderboard, and the more money you get at the end of the year.
Where does the studio fall into? Like, I kind of want to dig into a little bit of the studio. You're creating so much original programming. You're creating scripted content, documentaries. You're doing all of these things with the driver incentive program. Like, maybe give us a little bit of a peek inside the 60 million facility that you talked about. How much of a role that plays in all of these efforts.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll give you, like, if you can bear with me, like, on a little history lesson here to set it up. We were coming out of COVID in 2020. And so, like, in 2021, our lease agreement at a prior building came up. we had to make a decision on whether we were going to still be a tenant in that downtown Charlotte office facility, or if we wanted to take more control and kind of double down on our production business and build something on our own. It was also a year and a half ahead of the media rights window. And what we saw happening is you had the legacy media companies like a Fox and NBC who have been partners for us for a long time. That Fox and NBC have their own internal production divisions, and they've been doing this for decades. And they're going to continue to be in the production business for decades to come. But you saw these newcomers like an Apple, like an Amazon, eventually a YouTube, eventually a Netflix, eventually a CW, who we ended up partnering with, that did not have decades of experience in the production business, but they might be buyers of our media rights. So we made a educated guess that when we went to do our media rights deal in 2023, which was ended up being a year after we made the decision to build this facility, we made an educated guess that we would best set ourselves up for those media rights discussions if we could also handle the production responsibilities associated with that media rights deal. So that ended up happening. So we got into the market in 2023. We broke ground on this building in August of 2022. We went to market in February of 2023 for a media rights deal, and within a few weeks, we had an offer from a newcomer to the sports business, the CW, that wanted to buy our Saturday series, the NASCAR Riley Auto Parts series. But they said, "Hey, we don't have live event production experience. Can you do this for us?" And we were well positioned to say yes to that. So we moved the live event production work from our network partners to a fully in-house operation. It's the production agreement with the CW was signed at the exact same time as the media rights agreement. Those two needed to be signed at the same time. So strategically, like, it helped in the media rights piece. And I think where we've been really pleasantly surprised is how the industry, the NASCAR industry, drivers, teams, sponsors have embraced this facility over the last year or two as well.
Some might think it's good timing, but that's really foresight. You saw where the market was going. You saw that there was an opportunity for others and new partners coming in. I mean, you saw it with MLS and Apple, right? Apple is essentially telling MLS to produce all of the content and they stream it.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, and listen, I think there will be more opportunities for leagues to take control of that production and move that in house as well. Like if you look at what's happening in the RSN space today and what MLB is doing in particular, like it helps to have the league control a lot of that. Frankly, we care the most. Like we're always going to care the most. We've been around for 78 years. We expect to be around for another 78 years. We care about what is broadcast and the voices that tell our story, and this allows us to do that really well.
That's awesome. I'll tell you, my first exposure to NASCAR was actually in India. Actually, was through Days of Thunder. I didn't really have an appreciation for it at the time. You know, for me, it was more about a Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman thing rather than
Understand,
NASCAR.
understand. Yeah.
But I hear it's coming back, and that also sort of dovetails into some another question that I was thinking about was archive footage. There's so much value in old footage, especially key moments and stuff. How are you guys utilizing that type of content, especially as you're producing more of your own content? And then, obviously, some of it might also get used in movies and stuff. So, wanted to touch on a little bit, whatever you're able to share about the
No,
potential
of
scene.
course, of course. Yeah. So NASCAR, we've been around since 1948, so it's been a good run so far. We control all the archive and the footage associated with the sport going back to the early 1950s. There's some pretty cool content that we have there. I'll give you a few examples. When we partnered with Amazon to do the definitive documentary of Dale Earnhardt Sr. came out a few days before Amazon's first race last year, which is the Coca-Cola 600. It was a four episode show. We provided 800 hours of footage to the documentary makers to do the Dale Earnhardt Sr. show, so that they could educate themselves on Dale Seniors. And all of this is tagged, right? Like they're not just watching races that don't include Dale Earnhardt Sr., for instance. Is all of that footage is tagged, so they can see every interview that Dale Sr. did, every race that he finished in, and frankly, tell a better story of one of the icons and legends of not just our sport, but just the sports landscape as a whole. Without that archive footage, I don't think they tell as compelling a story. I don't think it's the number one sports documentary that Amazon has ever done, which it was. And I think we had a great lead in, frankly, to Amazon's first live event, which is at the Coca-Cola 600 and did 2.7 million viewers. It exceeded all of our expectations as well. So there's those moments in time that are really important, and then there's day-to-day programming that will publish all the archives on YouTube, so it's accessible to our fan base. If they want to go back and watch the 2004 Daytona 500, they can do that. It's at a click of a button. And then we'll also program our fast channel, which has been really successful with a lot of race replays as well, particularly like in the lead up to, we're going to be in Darlington this week. You'll see some of the best Darlington moments going into this weekend at Darlington.
Anything to tell us Days of Thunder, the sequel?
Yeah, not sure how public we are with all of that is probably the short version of that
I mean, I read
comment.
it in the news, so I found out about it through
Has
through
to be has to be right then. I know there's conversations happening, within the industry for sure. I think there's a shared interest in making something happen, both from, NASCAR's industry point of view, as well as, from the people in Hollywood that actually make those type of decisions. So I think there's probably more to come there.
a few more questions. I wanted to touch on the international strategy and how you look at the markets. But before that, as there's more content and more platforms, how much does digital play a role in keeping the fan grounded to the NASCAR brand per se? You know, you obviously care about people watching the races on different platforms. You're producing so much content. It's on different platforms on YouTube, on Apple, CW, Amazon, HBO Max. I mean, there's like from a fan has like close to a dozen touch points at this point in time to NASCAR. How do you keep that fan grounded? And you mentioned this even with the NBA example, right? Like you, when is the next game coming? You have to figure out where the next game is. But in your case, it may not necessarily be the next game, but it's like, hey, the Truck Series, the O'Reilly series, there's the Coca-Cola 600. At the end of the day, it's still NASCAR. The fan, it's a fan of NASCAR. How much does digital play a role in shaping that journey for a fan?
It's a critical role for sure, but what I would say outside of kind of the NASCAR, um, kind of machine or our own, internal owned and operated ecosystem, the people that talk about NASCAR with some of the best authenticity don't work for us. It's reporters from The Athletic, it's Dale Earnhardt Jr., there's a separate podcast company called Dirty Mo Media, that covers the sport, really well, very NASCAR name. So I would say we're similar-ish to, like, golf in that there's the PGA Tour centric version of like the content machine, that be maybe a little bit more filtered or straight down the middle. And then there's kind of the no laying up type of podcast in the PGA Tour. We have our version of that as well. So to me personally, like my NASCAR diet is a lot of podcasts and it's a lot of like driving from my house to my office and back and forth or going for a run, listen to a podcast and keeping up with NASCAR. And then during the week, there's certainly a lot of results, news, standings like NASCAR.com and NASCAR O&O platforms are kind of the destination for that. But very active Reddit community, as you can imagine. It's a very loyal, but also a very vocal fan base at times. There's not many days that there's not some type of story or controversy that usually takes us into the next race weekend. So there's an owned and operated part of all of it that we control, but I would say that non-owned and operated part is probably even more important because it's where a lot of our fan base goes to get their NASCAR content and news.
Have you ever thought about, just like you brought studio and content creation in house, have you thought about bringing in some of those communities onto your owned and operated platforms and giving them, like, making NASCAR's digital properties and owned and operated properties become like the town hall for all NASCAR fandom, so to speak?
I think the thought there, if we're ever to move in that direction, is it would probably be more, what are we best at? And like where are we best? And then where are the independent voices of the sport best? Like, are we better on technical infrastructure? Are we better at monetization? Are we better at like the blocking and tackling on the business side? Probably. And then, but can I deliver a thought on what's going to happen this weekend at Darlington as well, or as credibly as Dale Earnhardt Sr.? Like, or sorry, Dale Earnhardt Jr. Like, absolutely not, no chance. And so I would not be good at that. And there's a lot of our folks that while they're excellent at what they do, sometimes the independent voice carries a little bit more water with our fan base.
That's totally fair. So just coming back to the international strategy, obviously we talked about Americana and NASCAR being such a part of the American culture. In the grand scheme of things, I would say NASCAR doesn't have as much exposure to a wider international audience. How much of that is a part of your strategy? I know you guys have dabbled in translating into different languages, especially in Spanish and stuff for the Mexican audience. You've talked about doing races there as well. Where do you guys see that as fitting into part of your strategy going forward?
We distribute content really, really well, and we monetize content really, really well from an international perspective. So we're in 185 countries and territories and 550 million TV homes. We have a partnership with IMG that distributes a lot of our content. So we have boots on the ground, and we do our deals directly in the Americas, the Canada, US, and LATAM. Outside the Americas, we do not have boots on the ground in the UK or in South Africa or in Australia or in Thailand to do those deals. So we rely on IMG to distribute, monetize on our behalf, and then we do have a commercial agreement with them. I would say we can do that reasonably well. I think where I talked earlier about like maybe an advantage we have on a week to week sport versus some of our other peers. I think where we have a little bit of a disadvantage is that the traveling circus that is NASCAR and bringing 40 haulers and dozens of pit crew members on the week to week basis. Like it would be very hard for us. And we also have a long season. Like we're essentially live from February to November, and we're at Las Vegas last week. We'll be Darlington this week. Then we'll be in Bristol. There's not many weekends off from that February to November. In fact, there's usually only two. Um, so packing up and going to London, for instance, it would be very difficult logistically to do that. Can we do that in the Americas? You saw us go to Mexico City last year. First time we've run an international race since 1958, and that was great. And it was really cool to be there. I was there with my family, and it was a very fun event. But even that, like, it was a logistical challenge for the industry to get down there and back, and then going from Michigan to Mexico City and then back up to Pocono. Like hopefully there's no rain delay anywhere in there because there's a stress on the ecosystem. So I'd say probably first phase is a little bit more in the Americas. Maybe there's something in Canada, for instance, and then to the extent we were to look at something in December and January when we're off, maybe that's where you could actually have the time to execute against something like that. But it would be part of a longer discussion for sure.
From a growth perspective, and what does the next stage of growth for NASCAR look like? Obviously, beyond the media rights, broadcast revenue streams, ticketing obviously is a key part of your revenue strategy as well. But I don't know how the split works between like between the actual tracks and NASCAR, more from an education standpoint. What is the next phase of growth for you, where you're focusing most of your efforts going forward?
Well, we have seen a lot of growth on the sponsorship side, in particular. I will say that. So we had a record new business year this year for 2026. I think what we have tried to do is now that we are essentially pretty vertical operation between 20 of the NASCAR tracks being owned and operated, a great relationship with the non-NASCAR tracks. It's a company named Speedway Motorsports that operates most of the non-NASCAR tracks. Obviously, know our TV partners very, very well. So what we've tried to do on the sponsorship side is build in these must-spend buckets across the entire industry. So there's a NASCAR track spend, there's a NASCAR IP spend, and we've done that well historically, but also building in must spends with the team so that there's a driver and team component to each one of these deals, as well as a must spend with the media network. So then there's certainly some debate behind the scenes on what the right splits are, but it's not client facing debate, if that makes sense. Like the client is buying a package for $4 million or whatever the number is, and then they're getting all this stuff, and they can dial up and down the assets depending on what works for them. But I think going to market with that more vertical sales approach, we saw a lot of success on that in 2025 and 2026, and we'll look to grow that in the future for sure.
Awesome. And then another future perspective question, what does NASCAR look like in 5 to 10 years? Obviously, we talked about when you went to market in 2013 versus when you went to market in 2023. What does NASCAR look like? More of the same 5 to 10 years from now, or are you seeing any fundamental shifts in fandom there?
I think the biggest fundamental shift that we've had over the last 5 years is changing our schedule in a material way. I worked at NASCAR for 21 years. For the first 16 or so, we never changed our schedule once. It was just Pocono's on Pocono's date and Dover's on Dover's date and Darlington's on Darlington's date. Since we became a private, since we took two companies, NASCAR and IC, which is the tracks, merged them, became private, we had a little bit more license to think longer term about fan growth and development and not quarter to quarter when we're reporting financials to Wall Street. So I would expect more of that. So if you think about the last 5 years, we've run a race inside LA Coliseum, tore up a football field, ran a race inside of LA Coliseum. Talked earlier about the first international event that we ran at Mexico City since 1958. Yeah, ran our first street course ever in Chicago in 2023. We'll have another new bell and whistle, I'm sure, in 2027. This year's big tentpole is running at the Naval Base in Coronado. So what we've seen is like I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a 15-minute drive from the Charlotte Hornets arena. I'm a 15-minute drive from a Carolina Panthers game. But NASCAR is not as accessible from a geographic perspective because the tracks are huge. So our tracks, the real estate footprint for Talladega is significant when it's a 2.6-mile track. So can we find our moments and our spots to bring our product to the metro areas, which is what we've done. I'd expect more of that in the future. And then I think big picture, it's balancing our core fan base against like growing the sport. And so we've seen that so far this year. We're up 26% in 18 to 34 so far this year. That is again off of a 60% growth last year. But the numbers with our older and core fan base is remaining kind of where they need to as well. So that's the balancing act of any property in 2026, but one that's hits pretty close to home with NASCAR for sure.
I definitely, I've been part of some of these, sports business award juries and stuff. And one of the entries actually that I was judging at one point was the NASCAR street race, and
Yeah.
numbers
Which
were
one?
awesome.
Which one? Yeah.
The
What
Chicago
was
one,
it?
the first
Chicago
Chicago
one.
one.
Yeah, Chicago one.
Yeah, yeah,
SPJ's event of the year. Yeah, you got it.
correct. That's right. So I was there.
There you go. Me too.
I don't know, maybe I'm allowed to talk about it now since it's 2 years
Sure.
ago.
Fire away. Yeah, let's get you on the record.
For just as again, from an international fan's perspective, what's the biggest misconception? You must have heard this a lot, especially as Formula One came to town and Drive to Survive and comparisons started being made and stuff. What's the one biggest misconception that you think for an international fan base about NASCAR?
Yeah, no shortage of misconceptions about all things NASCAR, I would say. I'd say when I'm traveling internationally and speaking about the sport, what I would say we need to do a better job doing is telling the story about the technology of the sport. Frankly, I think there is a perception that F1 is above and beyond, head and shoulders above where NASCAR is. I would say that is fundamentally not true. We have in-car cameras in every single car. We have 120 cameras that are following the race. We have pit road automated tracking. We have 200 competition data points that are firing off cars that are going 190 miles an hour at any given point in time. We operate our own production business. Like we can go on and on and on. We have a remote race control center that is about a 20-yard walk from me right now, where all those video feeds go back so that we can call the race in Concord. And all that is done based on like very sophisticated high-end connectivity solutions across the top of the line vendors in the ecosystem. That story I don't think we have not told as well as some of our counterparts. And that's one that I enjoy telling when I can.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I'll say this, and we can end on this note. My personal experience when we started working with Tim in NASCAR, that was my biggest misconception, and I was blown away by how technologically savvy the organization was from every aspect, not just digital, racetrack, production, everything was. And then I saw that firsthand when I went to Daytona this year as well, which was actually a long time coming, but it is a very, very sophisticated organization from a technology standpoint. So kudos to that.
No, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think if you have our digital rights are in-house, our production business is in-house, like there's a lot of in-house expertise. There's a lot of engineers that are way more intelligent than I am on all this stuff. There's a lot of engineers on the competition side that are just world-class as well. So for a company of 1,300 people, we do a lot that I think we take for granted sometimes, but it's pretty cool to see it up close and personal.
Fantastic. Ryan, thank you for taking the time. I think we've gone quite a bit over what we bargained for, but this was amazing. Your answers were great. Thank you for being so open and for joining us.
Here, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it, and catch up soon.
Thanks for listening to Future of Fandom. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow LiveLike on LinkedIn for more conversations with the people shaping what's next in the world of sports and media. Until next time, keep building for fans, not just users.